So, good afternoon. As you know, it's a very special day today. We have a special guest, quite unique, the Minister of Trade from Korea, Han-Koo YEO, and it's a privilege that you won't have, I think, many times, never had it before. I will introduce him. His background is quite exceptional, and I don't want to use too much time of his lecture, but allow me to say a few things. So, Minister has been appointed in August this year under President Moon Jae-in, and before that, he had a long list of appointments in the Ministry for Trade, but also outside. So, I'll give a few of those appointments. He was a presidential secretary just before becoming trade minister. And before that, he was deputy minister of trade in 19 and 20. 17 to 29, he was commercial attaché in the US, and you will see the breadth of his expertise. And before that, director general in the regional trade agreement, the FTA sort of bureau. In 14-16, directly involved as director in the TPP in Asia. He was also, before that, in 9 and 10, director of the department responsible for climate change. And a long list of positions, but let me say a few words about his exceptional education background. He has, among other things, 2 degrees from Harvard, one from an MBA from Harvard Business School, and then another degree from the Kennedy School after a business administration degree in Korea. He has also published quite a few interesting books and other type of publication, which makes him an exceptional person because of this mix of governmental, academic, and business background. But one of the topics that we will look at are the so-called special economic zones. And the list of awards, I will exempt you from this long list, but he has had things from the International Finance Corporation, the World Bank Financial and Private Sector Development Award, another award from the President of Korea, Air Force Public Affairs Officer Leadership Award, etc., etc. So today, he will talk about multilateralism and Korea's place in the multilateral trading system. Korea, you know that I have 2 hats. I'm also a 28 years civil servant in the WTO, and I can tell you that Korea is a very active player in many areas, but in particular now also in the so-called reform. With this, Minister, thank you again for honoring us, and please.
Yes. Good afternoon. It's always a great pleasure to come back to campus. I can feel your energy, this young, dynamic, and vibrant energy. And I'd like to thank Professor Marceau for the extremely kind introduction. In fact, I just came from Paris. You might have seen from the newspaper that there was OECD and WTO mini trade minister meetings, which took place in Paris for the last couple of days. And I came to Geneva late afternoon yesterday. And then I've heard that this University of Geneva is the best university in Europe. And I wanted to meet with all of the young, bright, smartest students and have a, the live discussion on your interest in trade and also what you know about Korea. So it's my great honor and pleasure to speak with you today. So you didn't come for the history lesson, but I cannot help but start off by highlighting the prestigious and very impressive history that your university has. I understand that this University of Geneva has 450 years of history, and then you have 10 Nobel laureates, and then, you know, I think this university really contribute to our civilization. And John Calvin said about opening a seminary, which became this great university during the turbulent times in 1559, especially while the rest of Europe was in the throes of the Protestant Reformation. And German sociologist Max Weber, born about 300 years later, he credited Calvin with sanctifying the Protestant work ethic, such as diligence, moderation, and calling, that has been argued underpins the modern capitalism as we know it today. So Max Weber viewed that Calvin formed a psychological and philosophical foundation for the birth of modern capitalism. In this respect, it is not a coincidence that Geneva is the seat of the WTO, which is based on market principle, free and fair trade, and also multilateralism. You don't have to dig deep into to realize that Calvin's perspective to the national level, which is capitalism, work ethic, and multilateralism, is at the core of Korea's economic rise over the last 6 decades. So let's turn to the topic of today's this discussion, which is the Korea's place in the multilateral trading system. So before we get started, let me ask you questions. What's your first impression of Korea? What comes into your mind when you think about Korea? Yeah, please.
Leading country in the technological development field, especially in the very fine technological.
No, it's very
Yeah.
good. Louder.
Sure.
Especially in the technological development of chips, of the technology, and
Mhm.
AI programming.
Yes, excellent. Are you using any of the Korean technological products now?
Sadly not. I think the only close to Asian technology I'm using might be a Huawei phone, but I am much more satisfied with it than I am with the Western products.
Very nice. Okay. Any other idea? What's your first impression of Korea? Yes, Jeremy.
Strong democracy in East Asia.
Strong democracy. Okay, that makes sense as well. Any other idea? Yes, please. Sorry? Idol industry. K-pop. Who's your favorite?
I don't have
There is no army here, the BTS fan? What about K-movies, or K-drama that you recently watched? What? Squid Game. I've never seen the Squid Game. That's my top list to do when I go back to Korea. But you know, a couple of days ago, I read in a news article that the CEO of Netflix, he said that this Squid Game is on a path to the most watched, drama on Netflix. So I'm interested to see that Squid Game as well. So yeah, thank you very much for your sharing your thought. Yes, now Korea is one of the the most dynamic industrial and technological power, and also one of the most active trading nation in the world. Probably you might be familiar with all these Korean technological products that you see in your in your house or anywhere. But it was not like that always. If we go back, 30 years or 40 years in time, but I will revisit that point. So now Korea is a strong and open trading nation. In terms of manufacturing competitiveness, according to the study by UNIDO, Korea's manufacturing competitiveness is ranked third in the world. And then car production, steel production, petrochemical production ranks all 3, 4, number 3, 4, or 5 in the world. And then as the gentleman rightly pointed out, some of the high-tech product that you see in everyday life from Korea in terms of this OLED, foldable OLED. It's a world market share by Korean products is about 90%. And DRAM, now it's the digital era. We have to use everywhere these chips, memory chips, non-memory chips. But in DRAM, market share by Korean product is about 71.1%. And TV, NAND flash, batteries, shipbuilding, all those the core export products from Korea, ranging the 50% of market share. And Korea is also one of the highly connected society in these days in terms of the digital economy, because Korea is the size of Hungary, or I think about 2.5 times bigger than that of Switzerland. But we are still small country. We have about 50 million population. So we are very, very dense the country, territory. But I think one of the advantage of such small, dense country in this digital era is that it could be very much connected through broadband and high-speed internet, etc. So in terms of this criteria for digital competitiveness, in terms of smartphone penetration rate, Korea is #1 in the world. 95% of Korean population has access to this smartphone penetration. High-speed internet penetration rate also #1 with the 83%. So it's not unusual. You see that in a rural area of Korea, you see this high speed 5G, this internet connection, mobile internet connection everywhere, even in the rural area. And as I mentioned, Korea is one of the most active trading nation in the world. In terms of our export figure, Korea is #7, and trade volume is #9, and GDP is #10 in the world. In terms of why did we become such a highly trade-dependent trading nation? In terms of this trade dependency rate vis-a-vis our GDP is about 63%. Sometimes it goes up to 70–80%. So Korea is highly dependent on this multilateral trading system. I will explain why in the next slide. In fact, Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world in early 1960s, especially after the Korean War. In 1950, Korea was devastated with the ashes from the Korean War. And then in 1962, when Korea began to develop our economy in a modern way, Korea's GDP per capita was like $70. GDP per capita was about $70, which was poorer than many of the countries in Africa at that time. But Korea opened up. We realized that Korean market is too small to just depend on domestic market. I think this is one of the good example of how country can turn crisis or disadvantage into opportunity or advantage. Korea is, at that time, our population was, I think, about 20 or 30 million population. So it was not enough. We didn't have economies of scale. If we were like European Union or United States, we didn't have to think about exporting our product, you know. And also, Korea is highly energy dependent, you know, country. We have no natural resources whatsoever, especially during this oil crisis. So Korea has to import about 95%, more than 95% of our energy from overseas. So we need foreign currency, hard foreign currency, to import these natural resources. In order to that, to earn this hard currency, we have to export. That's why we, not like many other developing countries, which were in similar situation as Korea at that time, Korea adopted export-driven growth strategy. Some other countries during that time in Latin America or in Africa, they adopted this import substitution strategy. But I think after decades, it turns out that Korea's strategy of this highly export-driven the growth model really paid well in case of Korea. Also, you might find it interesting that during 1950, when this GATT rounds of Turkey round was progressing, Korea has sent our delegation to that GATT, the GATT round, Turkey round, in the middle of this Korean War. When I think about those policymakers at that time in Korea, I really admire their foresight. And even in the midst of this devastating Korean War, they thought of this multilateral trading system. After the war, one of the effective ways to grow our economy is to really be integrated into this global trading system. So Korea sent our delegation to this GATT negotiation even during the war, but in the end, in 1967, Korea finally officially joined this GATT system. I mentioned that one of the familiar Korean product that you face every day these days is like this high-tech mobile phone, and the electric cars and things like that. But that was not the case, before. Let me ask you another question. In 1960s and 70s, do you know what was the #1 export product item from Korea? You need wild imagination. Yes.
Was it beef or fish?
Beef or fish? No, we didn't. So many people were starved to death. So we didn't have any beef or food to export to other countries. You need wild imagination. No idea? Okay. Korea's first #1 export item was wheat in 1960s and 70s. You know why? Because at that time, our Korean mothers and sisters, they had to cut off their long hair to sell to these wig makers to make money, to put food on the table for their families. And that's why the Korean wigs was so popular, because other countries' wig, they use this kind of plastic material, but Korean wig used the real human hair because of the sacrifice of these Korean mothers and sisters at that time. So it's I told you, you need wild imagination to think that Korea, which export all these high-tech items right now, has started about 60 years ago. We had started from this human wig, human hair wig. So this is, I think, is a powerful graph that I can show you how this international trading system and multilateralism can make a big difference in one country's growth, from one of the poorest countries in the world to one of the most advanced countries in the world right now, in just a couple of generations, over just 60-year time frame. So when we compare our GDP in early 1960s with the current figure, Korea's GDP grew about 560 times during that time. But in case of this trade, it grew 4 times bigger than that of the GDP growth. So Korea's trade volume with the world increased by 1960 times, so almost 2,000 times over this about 60-year period. So that really shows that Korea is an epitome of growth through trade, and how a poor country can grow fully utilizing this international multilateral trading system. This is, I know this, the Geneva is the city of multilateralism and WTO, so you might find it a bit weird, but Korea also adopted this bilateral FTA strategy, because for a long time this WTO and Doha round has been dormant, and then the trading environment, the global trading environment changed so fast that Korea decided to pursue expanding this global trade network through bilateral negotiation from, I think, about 15 years ago. So we took very aggressive and intensive strategy of this bilateral FTA network. So now Korea has FTA, free trade agreement, with 57 countries. And that trade network covers 79% of global GDP. And you might have learned from a newspaper last year that the 15 countries in the region concluded RCEP negotiation, which is actually the biggest FTA, which was concluded as of now. So once this RCEP is in effect, this coverage goes up to like 85%. Yes, of course, there's a pros and cons. The pros is, you can, as a second best option, you can expand this free trade network, and your companies can really get integrated into this global value chain. Cons is that, yes, also there's the cost incurred from all these bilateral FTA network. For example, rules of origin. You have to have all these different rules of origin with all these different FTA network. So that's, in economists they call it spaghetti roll effect. Just by all these complicated, confusing different rules of origin, the businesses, in particular small and medium enterprises, have to pay additional cost. Korea is actually one of the rare countries which have FTAs with 3 biggest the economies in the world. First, United States, and second, European Union, and also third with China. So that's how Korea is positioning itself as a gateway to Asia. If you European businesses or American businesses, they want to do business with, you know, if they want to business in Asia, I think Korea is provide the ideal, the gateway to, you know, do business in Asia. I just go through quickly this slide. This is kind of, you know, sketch of the current status of Korea and European Union, you know, trade. I know that, you know, Switzerland is not part of European Union, but I guess some of the students are from these European countries. And also, Korea has this FTA with EFTA, you know, which is, you know, who's the Swiss is a part of the EFTA, right? So, you know, I think this shows that how this kind of a bilateral free trade network can help promoting trade and investment between these two sides. So in terms of this trade, if you compare before and after this FTA network, you can see this the blue graph line showing that the world trade during this period contracted by 4%, you know, minus 4%. But partly thanks to this free trade network, the trade between Korea and European Union increased almost by 5%. So now the European Union is Korea's third largest trading partner, and to Europe, Korea is 8th largest trading partner. And I think in Asia, probably the second largest after China. And investment as well. After this FTA network, investment in both ways really jump up. So if you look at this the blue line, this is investment from Korea to European Union. It increased by 300%. And this shows why Korea's investment into this Europe skyrocketed. You see that in these critical industries of the batteries, the electric car batteries, and also this electronic, electronics, the household electronics, and chemicals, and then the automobiles. Korean companies are very active in investing in European Union region. So just we put some of the representing examples of Korean investment into European Union. So I think I will stop here with my presentation, and I'll be very happy to interact with you with any Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. I think it's a beautiful sort of evidence of the benefits of trade.
Mm-hmm.
And you do say Korea was poor not long ago and has grown. Well, it is also true of Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And people often forget this is a very international class, both in the room and on virtual. But there are some Swiss people, and Switzerland in the last years, 150 years since the Second World War, has boomed thanks to trade.
Right.
I have questions, but I will first give this privilege to students who may have questions. I think we have 10 minutes, so we'll take advantage. Anyone with a question, please raise your hand. Yes, the lady in the back. Maybe remove your mask so we hear you better. You can remove your mask when you speak.
Well, thank you. At first, thank you so much for showing us the benefits of free trade. I just wonder whether the free trade will bring some negative effects to domestic industry. How can we balance the free trade with the protection of our domestic industry?
Are you from Korea?
No.
Okay. Because you said our domestic industry.
Like every country's domestic industry.
Yeah, I think that's the common challenges that we are facing. There's a pros and cons, but I think one of the ways to turn the crisis into opportunity is to use this open and free trade as a way to innovate and reform your domestic industries. If you look at the history of, for example, Korean industry, industries exposed to international trade tend to be stronger and more competitive, whereas this domestic industry, they don't have to face competition in the global market, so they tend to be less innovative. So I think, of course, in this kind of free trade, the unemployment, or some people may lose job, and some industries or some factories may close. But I think it is up to also government policies to turn those failing or ailing those industry companies into to help transforming themselves into more innovative companies. So, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, the gentleman with the white jacket.
First, thank you very much for your presentation. I am from Colombia, South America, and I know that South Korea is currently has pending negotiations with the Pacific Alliance, which is a trade bloc that is Colombia, Chile, Peru, and Mexico. What kind of advantages for the trade of South Korea do you see that, that becoming an associate member of this trade bloc of South America, what kind of benefits that will bring to South Korea trade economy?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, actually, I was the chief negotiator for Korea's accession to Pacific Alliance from a couple of years back. I think the member countries of Pacific Alliance are like-minded countries. I think those 4 countries pursue this free trade and also open trade, and then I think we have a kind of strategic fit. Nowadays, the Latin American countries need new partners in Asia, and in Asian countries need new partners in Latin America, because now the world is getting smaller because of this digital trade and then this globalization, although we are experiencing some backlash on this globalization. So I think this is a big trend that the countries in around the world need new partners, new friends to promote this trade. So in that sense, Korea has the bilateral FTA, free trade agreement, with 3 countries in Pacific Alliance, Colombia, Peru, Chile. We don't have FTA with Mexico, but I think this as a group also adds value to, as I explained, in terms of this forging new partnership between countries in Asia and countries in Latin America. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the gentleman there.
Sir, I had a question about Korea's, or the future of Korea's investments plans. In the last slide that you have shown us, you have presented the fact that Korea has invested extensively in Poland, in the Czech Republic, in Hungary, and in Austria. Is Korea perhaps planning to expand the other side of the Eastern Europe, to perhaps go to Romania, Bulgaria, or Greece, or to any other Eastern European countries? Is that perhaps on Korea's agenda, or is that the future plan that they have? Might that be viable?
I think that is really up to these companies. The Korean government doesn't have any say that, oh, you should invest in here or invest in there. I think basically it is the business environment of the country, how active that particular government and leadership, political leadership, are ready to support, by providing enough, the investment incentives, making this all these regulatory framework business friendly and open to this foreign investment from foreign Asian countries. So it really up to these host countries, government policy as well as economic, macroeconomic, microeconomic condition. In fact, in Paris, I met the trade minister from Hungary, and then he mentioned that these days Korean companies are really flooding into Hungary. And I think one of the factor was that the current Hungarian government seems to be very active in inducing this particular investment from Korea by providing these financial incentives and then providing more opportunities of support. So, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, the gentleman in black here, and then after the one with the second one, the two of you could ask 2 questions and Minister can answer afterwards.
Thank you. I would like to know what you think is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the trade system of Korea.
And the other gentleman?
I have a specific question concerning South Korean trade policy. In trade 2018, South Korea renegotiated its trade deal with the US, and it agreed to reduce exports of steel to the US by 30%. And under WTO law, it's actually illegal to voluntarily agree to restrict their exports to another country.
I told you they were good.
That argument when South Korea agreed to pass under that provision, do you think that is right?
Oh, I'm very impressed. Yeah, thank you for that question. Actually, easier one first. So COVID-19. Yeah, obviously, this COVID-19 is taking its toll on this global trading system. First and foremost, people have to travel freely between countries, right? And then also product as well. But because of this pandemic, all this quarantine, and then the cutting all these flight schedules. So I think that's it really affected this global trade environment. Also, we realized that the vulnerability of supply chain, global supply chain. Is okay? Yeah, global supply chain. So, yeah. Yeah, so we realized that, for example, the global automobile industry, in order to make one automobile, you need thousands of parts from all over the world. But so in some cases, the company depend on one factory in one country in sourcing all the specific parts. And then when the factory was shut down, because of this COVID-19, their employees, they got all these positive, and then they had to shut down the particular factory along this global value chain, and then the whole value chain stopped. So now businesses begin to realize that before, efficiency was the most important principle. So now in your business classes, you might have heard of this just-in-time management. It's wise to reduce your warehouse or stock to almost zero, so that you can make all this management efficient. But now businesses begin to realize that resilience and then the sustainability and stability becomes more important. So although it may imply a bit more additional cost, I think in the end it could make business sense to have this more redundant supply chain. So I think that's what is changing because of this COVID-19. Second part of the question was that the Korea's free trade agreement with United States. Actually, I was there at that time. I was part of the negotiating team, and then we didn't support this quota system. As you said, it's against the principle of this, the multilateralism and the free trade. But then Korea at that time was negotiating this Korea-US free trade agreement amendment process. And then in the US, the steel was politically very, very important, the product. Without this addressing the steel issue, the trade agreement process could fall apart. So I think sometimes in negotiation you have to make compromise. You kill everything, or you compromise but you save some of the core parts. So I think that's what we came up with, that compromised plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sometimes life is about second best.
Yes.
And this is why Korea is so important, because it's not about just free trade, as people say. It's about avoiding discrimination and regulations that favor free
Right,
trade.
right.
Another question, I think we have 5 minutes. The lady there, yes?
I would like to know what would be one of the biggest challenges for Korea when it comes to multilateral trading?
And maybe your last second,
Yeah.
yes, the gentleman, you?
My question was, in light of the political situation in the Korean peninsula, in light of the political situation on the Korean peninsula, how would a potential reunification with North Korea affect Korea's position in the multilateral trading system?
Yes. I think students are very, very smart. Yes, thank you for the question. As I said, Korea is one of the biggest beneficiaries of this multilateral trading system. And then, the key pillar of this multilateral trading system is the stable and predictable rule of law. So, when countries sometimes, fight over particular, the trade case, but if they cannot come to a peaceful resolution, what do? We turn to WTO, because before WTO had this dispute settlement system where regardless of it's a poor or big country, when you cannot settle between countries, there need to be some sort of a neutral international body that you can turn to resolve these international trade cases. So that was one of the key roles of the WTO, a multilateral trading system. But now that the dispute settlement system is in stalemate. So that's what we are, these trade ministers and these ambassadors in Geneva really struggling to find solution to this issue. But I think we may need some more time. But in order for this multilateral system to function as it was supposed to be, I think this dispute settlement system is very critical. And then the gentleman asked about the Korean Peninsula, North and South Korea issue, and how the possible potential reunification could affect this Korea's place in the multilateral system. I think if you look at this, the North Korea and South Korea, I think it really is another big example of how trade can make a big difference in the people's life. Because as I said, in 1953, when the Korean War ended, I mean, technically not ended yet, but it came to an armistice at that time. North Korea was much well-off country than South Korea. All other national resources are in the North Korea. All these industrial facilities were, demolished and devastated. And then, so I mean, the GDP per capita of North Korea was much, much higher than that of South Korea. But look at what happened after 70 years. One country in the South took the bold path of this political leadership, pursuing this open trade, trading with the world, and then making full use of this multilateral trading system. But another same people, same language, same culture in the North, they took a totally different path of closing down their economy. They are shut down, their economy to external or global market. Now the North Korean people are almost probably one of the poorest countries in the world. We are the same people. We use same language. We have same DNA. We have same culture. But see how much difference it made. The political leaders, what kind of a vision and strategy they have for their people. And I think open trade and this multilateral system was one of the defining factor which really divided the path between South and North Korea. And in terms of reunification, I think reunification, as we learn from German cases, I think reunification in the longer term, it will greatly benefit the Korea and the world as well. Because right now, Korea is it's a highly, technological and highly capital-intensive country. But our labor cost is rising, land price is rising. So, I mean, our South Korean, the small and medium enterprises, they are struggling right now. So many of them are relocating to the lower cost locations like China or ASEAN countries. But North Korea is, as I said, one of the poorest countries in the world, but they have plenty of human resources. They have plenty of natural resources. So, and we know that the people, those Korean people, are very, very diligent, hardworking people according to this work ethic of this, Calvin. So if we combine this competitive advantage of South Korea and North Korea, of course, for the, some time period, there will be big, costs related to this social and economic restructuring by integrating these two economies. But in the longer term, I think it will become one of the very, very powerful nations. And also, as I said at the beginning, the economies of scale is important in developing any economy. Now Korea is about 50 million people. North Korea is about 20 million people. So combined, the 70 million population is sort of enough size to really, develop your domestic consumption and economy. So I'm optimistic that sometime this reunification of Korean Peninsula will happen. In that case, it will really make big contribution to this Korean Peninsula, but also to the peace of the world, in the region and also around the world. So thank you.
Minister, it was really, again, I'm repeating myself, but an exceptional class to prove the benefits of trade. And also quite exceptional because we were lucky the dean of the law faculty stayed with us. So it's a special day, we will all remember it. I would like to ask the student to remain on your seat when we leave and to thank a last time the minister for sharing a big hour with us.
Thank you. Thank you.